Marhaba everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the Big Arabic Day. This is a special annual event hosted by the Arabic Studies program at UNL, made possible with the generous support from the Department of Modern Languages, Literatures. We're so excited to celebrate the Arabic language, culture, and community with you today. My name is Russer. I'm a senior majoring in nutrition, health, and exercise science with a minor in Arabic studies.
And hello everyone, my name is Danny and I'm a senior studying cellular biochemistry with a minor in Arabic studies as well. Although I come from Lebanese heritage, I've lived in the United States my entire life. It wasn't until I reached university that I had my first real exposure to the Arabic language. Before that, I had studied a bit of Spanish in high school, but let's be completely honest, none of us have anything even approximating fluency from our high school Spanish classes. Maybe a select few, but most of us don't. My first major exposure was largely due to my freshman year roommate who would occasionally drop a word or two here and there. And so I kind of ended up with the package of 5 words that every cultured non-native speaker knows, which is like habibi, mashallah, inshallah, haram, stuff like that. I did begin my Arabic journey though through self-study. I was working a desk job at a dormitory one night when I decided, this was in the summer, I thought, it's kind of boring, I hate my life, I'm not on vacation, I'm sitting at a desk in the summer, might as well learn Arabic, I have nothing better to do. I learned the alphabet that night, took 10 letters, memorized them, 5 more, memorized them, 5 more until I finished the entire thing. And even though I was in the early stages of language learning at that time, I fell in love with the sounds of the language. I honestly mostly was just happy that I could pronounce half of the letters. Kha, gha, ain, those aren't very easy. Anyway, before my sophomore year started, I came upon the Arabic Studies program, which completely changed the game for me. It took my learning from something I was doing on my own to a routine, a clear and defined upward trajectory in my linguistic capacity. Fast forward 2 years from then, and as I stand before you today, I'm a relatively advanced Arabic speaker, not just in Fusha, but in the Lebanese and Jordanian dialects. If you asked me 2 years ago, I would have never thought I would be here now, co-hosting the Big Arabic Day, acting as an ambassador for the program, or even speaking the language. I wouldn't even begin to imagine that these things were something that could possibly happen. But the Arabic Studies program made this possible for me. Learning Arabic has had a huge impact on my life, both personally and academically. It's helped me connect more with my heritage, and it's also just opened to me a new way of thinking. They say that when you learn a language, you learn more than the language. You learn a culture, you learn a people, you learn a tradition. A new way to see the world, a new way to live. It opens up a whole new way of thinking. And given the richness of the Arabic language and the culture that accompanies it, learning it as a non-native speaker will do all of that for you. And that's why we're here today, to highlight talent among professors, students, ambassadors, staff within the program, and to share how this program has helped shape us, not just as students, but as people. So let's continue to talk a little bit about how this program can do the same for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Here at UNL, the Arabic Studies program is more than just learning a language. It's an immersive experience, from fun and interactive classes to cultural events like this one. We get to explore the rich history, literature, and traditions of the Arabic-speaking world. One of my favorite courses that I have taken with Dr. Hassan is Women in Quran. In that class, we took a historical approach to Quran and studied the texts and how they've been interpreted across time. We looked closely at verses that mentioned women and also looked into how different scholars, both classical and modern, have understood these passages. Along the way, we examined the language of the Quran, its literary structure, and how interpretations of gender, power, and representations have developed across traditions of Islamic thought.
Thank you. And My favorite courses includes Global Islamic Debate. In that class, we explored how scholars and theologians, both classical and contemporary, grapple with some of the biggest questions in theology and philosophy. Questions surrounding things such as the punishment of the grave or the permissibility of music. The class provided us with the opportunity to explore some of the most debated topics in Islamic theology, all while honing our debating skills and participating in engaging discussions that improved our critical thinking and understanding of those topics. But we must, of course, mention that none of this program's success would be possible without the dedication of our amazing professors, staff, and volunteers. A huge thank you to Dr. Rigoberto Govera, Professor Hassan Saleh, Mike Kam, Samantha Deline, and our student volunteers and Arabic program ambassadors.
Now we would like to take a moment to recognize our 2024 Arabic ambassadors. Please stand up to be recognized as we call your name. Noura Naimi, Amani Al-Hamidi, Yasser Al-Mutawa'a, Danny Vinton, and me, Russell Al-Bawi. Let's also give a warm welcome to our new 2025 Arabic Studies volunteers. Please stand up as we call your name. Samara Tuma. She's not here. Malak Al-Sharifi. Judy Zarzar. Wit Saleh. And our photographer, Valentina Fowler. So now we would like to take time to introduce our beloved Dr. Abla Hassan. Dr. Abla is a professor of practice of the Arabic language and culture at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She's the program's founder and coordinator. Her teaching and research focuses on Quranic studies, Islamic feminism, and Arabic studies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hassan.
Thank you so much, Russell. Thank you so much, Danny, for the wonderful introduction. Assalamu alaikum, marhaba, meet marhaba, 100 marhabas from the Arabic Studies program. I'm so excited today that Dr. Simon Wood is joining us to share about his most recent translation, The Caliphate or Supreme Imamate, published 2024 with Yale University Press. We're so excited for that. Thank you for joining us. Muhammad Rashid Rida is a prominent Syrian reformer and intellectual. He is renowned for finding and establishing Al-Manar, which was a very successful Islamic magazine, in which he started publishing this book as a series before finalizing it as a book. Now, thanks to Dr. Simon Wood, the book is available for the first time for the English-speaking world. Thank you for that. I can't stress enough as a professor of Arabic language myself the importance of this work. Arabic or translation is not an easy task, let alone translating from Arabic to English. Arabic today is spoken as the 5th most popular spoken language around the globe, with more than 25 countries speaking the language and more than 300 million speakers of the language. Arabic is not only the ethnic language of Arab speakers, but it's the sacred language of the Quran, which makes it a language of interest to all Muslims around the world. But popularity doesn't mean simplicity, right? The Arabic language is known for being a very expressive, yet a very hard language. Educators of Arabic joining us today, native speakers of Arabic, and my students of Arabic, they know that. A very beautiful language, very expressive, a sophisticated system of synonymy, more than 28 letters and some sounds in the Arabic alphabet with no equivalent in English. Highly gendered language with terms, object, things, and abstracts to be classified as, I see students nodding their heads, my excellent students, to be classified as masculine and feminine. Last but not least, a very sophisticated verb conjugation chart. I see now 300 level students making faces now, right? Guys, you nailed it. Just by looking at the verb in Arabic, you can tell the number, the gender, and the tense of it. What I want to say, regardless of all these difficulties didn't stop you, Dr. Wood, from adding a historic accomplishment to the English-speaking world by finalizing this very important translation. And therefore, a round of applause to Dr. Simon Wood, please. Another round of applause, because this is a milestone to be added to your already successful career. Dr. Wood has recently promoted to full professor in religious studies at UNL. Please, another round of applause. I know you hate that, but I have to acknowledge all of that. And thank you so much to you. Before I end, I need to announce for some gifts to be given away today, part of the Arabic hospitality, right? So we gave you handouts with stickers. If you got a star on your handout, please stop with us for a gift from the Arabic Studies program before we leave. Doesn't matter the number of stars, any number of stars on your handout. Also, to share the last surprise, Dr. Wood shared with us 3 copies of his book. So 3 winners will leave with signed copies of the Caliphate or Supreme Imamate. You can tell I'm lucky enough I got my own copy. I'm hoping more people will leave with their own copies. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening with us, and to you, Dr. Wood.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and thank you all for being here. And I should mention also that Professor Abla helped me a lot with this program, with this book. So the book, as mentioned, was written by Muhammad Rashid Rida, generally known as Rashid Rida. Just raise your hand if you've ever heard of that name. So only a few of you. Well, who was he? Who was he? Rashid Rida lived from 1865 to 1935 and is generally known as a Syrian, although he was born and raised in a place that on today's map is in Lebanon. The 1865 map didn't look the way that it does today, but so generally known as a Syrian. As a young man, he moved to Cairo, and that would be his base for most of the rest of his career. He was prolific. He wore many hats: author, scholar, journalist. So author, writer in a traditional vein, journalist, writer in a modern vein, publisher, businessman, and he was also involved sometimes significantly in the politics of his day. As Professor Abla mentioned, he's most famous for his magazine, Al-Manar, published from 1898 onwards. A complete set of that, I think, is about 30,000 pages. So typically hundreds of pages a year, a little bit less during the war. The world's first commercially successful Islamic magazine, which is not to say that he made a fortune out of it. It was read throughout the Arabic-speaking and other parts of the Muslim majority world, and also in places that might not immediately be expected. Bangkok, Singapore, Brazil, to name a few. Now, notwithstanding his many different projects and his many different hats, his main project was clear and consistent and captured by his magazine's title. In English, that translates as the lighthouse or the beacon. The lighthouse or the beacon. Rida felt that most of his Muslim peers were, so to speak, lost. They'd been failed by their leaders, or perhaps more pertinently, those who ought to have been their leaders. Thus, the lighthouse. What does a lighthouse do? It shows the way, right? Points the direction for those who are lost. In it, Rida argued that the modern world can and must be Islamic, at least for Muslims, and that Islam can and must be modern. He felt that Muslims had been failed by leaders and others who had embraced the one to the detriment of the other. So, for example, those who embodied Jumud, which we could correspond in English to traditionalism, had been exclusively focused on tradition and neglected the resources and opportunities of modern culture and modern science. By contrast, those who in English translation are often referred to as secularists, sometimes atheists, sometimes heretics, but most literally Europeanizers, those who embodied Tafarnuj, which literally means aping the Franks. Aping, that is imitating. If you think of aping, you imitate, but in an unthinking way. You just see something and you copy it. The Franks, which then by extension means Europeans more generally, and then even Western people more generally still. The people who followed that path made, so to speak, the opposite mistake, right? Exclusively focused on modern culture, Western culture, neglecting the potential that Rida felt was inherent in the Islamic tradition. So to him, both of these paths were extreme. They were both extreme paths, and so he advocated instead what he characterized as a moderate path, rejecting these two extremes, the path of reform, Islah. And this entailed, I think if we're thinking of keywords, discriminating. That is what he felt the people on either side had failed to do. So in other words, you look at modern culture, modern science, but you do so with a discriminating eye, right? So you don't simply adopt it wholesale. You don't need to do something like, for example, take lessons learning how to dance, so that you know how to dance like Europeans do. So some people were doing things like that. So you look at it and you figure out, well, what is useful, but what is not essential, right? Simple example of something useful would be the telegraph cable, a recent invention. It would be silly, he argued, not to use it, right? Because it's a non-Muslim technology. And at the same time, you take that same discriminating approach to Islamic culture, right? So you don't just adopt it wholesale, you don't simply regurgitate what you get from the previous generation and the previous generation, but you look at it with a discriminating eye. The word of God, that's obviously useful. The authentic word of the prophet, that's obviously useful. When it comes to the words of the scholars and others through the generations and centuries, not all of that is useful, right? Now that's painting with very broad strokes and somewhat simplifying, but that captures the heart of his project, which gives a general background to the more specific topic which the book is concerned with, the Islamic Caliphate. And he began writing this book in December of 1922. And the significance of that date will become apparent. So he wrote it during the winter and spring of 1922 to 1923. And I'm going to begin by just reading 2 or 3 paragraphs from the very beginning of the book, which hopefully will set up my remaining comments. The Caliphate and the Sultanate have been a trial for Muslim peoples, as government of monarchy has been a trial for people belonging to other communities and having other religious confessions. This issue had lain dormant, and then events suddenly unfolding in recent days awoke it. when the Turks abolished the Ottoman dynasty's state and founded a republican state with a new form upon its ruins. The fundamental principles of their new state include a rejection of the notion that any individual in their new government could have authority on the basis of his title as caliph or sultan, along with a complete separation of religion and politics. But they designated somebody from the family of the previous sultans as the spiritual caliph of all Muslims. I'm covering a lot, but if you are trying to capture any of these words, spiritual is one you want to kind of underline there. The spiritual caliph of all Muslims. And they limited this caliphate to this dynasty, as we've explained elsewhere. Therefore, there have been more discussions of the issue of the caliphate and its ordinances in the newspapers. This has led to confusion, a tendency to proceed rashly, and the confounding of truth with falsehood. Hence, we saw that it was incumbent upon us to elucidate our Sharia's ordinances regarding that matter with the detail that the situation requires, so that truth be distinguished from falsehood. We also saw that we needed to discuss where the system of the caliphate stands in relation to other systems of government, the Muslims' practice when it comes to the caliphate, and what is incumbent upon them in this era. Our support for the new Turkish government is one of the reasons why we are obligated to provide the explanations and advice offered here. We support it only out of our concern for the religion's standing and the Muslims' welfare. Nothing weakens our religion and its people more than their servility toward the strong among them. Indeed, the ulama's partiality, I think you all know the ulama, that means the Islamic scholars, the ulama's partiality to monarchs and caliphs became a misfortune for them and for the people. Yet God made a covenant with those who have knowledge. Quote, "You shall clearly explain it to humankind and shall not conceal it," unquote. Quote, "Do not confound truth with falsehood or hide the truth while you know it." Those two lines are quotes from the Quran. Then some of the principles he will elaborate in the book include the principle that sovereign authority inheres in the community and not in the person of the ruler. The Muslim community is to conduct its affairs on the basis of mutual consultation. Under the law, the the prophet's caliph, has no privileges over the weakest individuals in the community. The caliph is only the person who implements either a rule that God has revealed or an opinion that the community has reached. The caliphate safeguards religion and the common good in worldly life. It combines virtue with prosperity, and it prepares the path to universal brotherhood. Now that again, he began that in December of 1922. Now, there was a reference there to recent events awakening this event, which had to that point in time lain dormant. Explaining the pertinence of that involves covering about 1,300 years of history in about 2 or 3 minutes, so I won't really try to do that. But essentially the caliphate came into existence in the year 632 when the Prophet Muhammad died, and according to what most Muslim people believe, those Muslims who are now known as Sunni Muslims, he left no detailed instructions on who should succeed him and on how the community should be led upon his demise. His companions came together and they created what became known as the institution of the Caliphate. That occurred kind of on an ad hoc basis where it emerged, so to speak, almost out of nothing. And by and large, tradition places great emphasis upon the fact that the first 4 caliphs, those of you who have any familiarity with Islam will know their names, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, that they were to some extent chosen by the community, or perhaps rather to sort of make that point the opposite way around. The significance of their appointment and their status comes from how they did not come to be in power. That is, they were not hereditary rulers. They did not come into power the way that a monarch comes into power. But, and again, I don't have time to get into this history. Some of it's laid out in the book if you want to read it. Rashid Rida summarizes it. But beginning in 661 and continuing until the Caliphate's final end in 1924, it became a hereditary institution. It became an institution that was inherited, that passed through various dynasties. And again, those of you who've studied a little bit of Islam will know the names of these dynasties. The Umayyad dynasty, which ruled from 661 to 750, the Abbasid dynasty, 750 to 1258, and the last great dynasty to hold the Caliphate was the Ottoman dynasty, the Ottoman Empire obviously coming to an end following the First World War. Now, what's important to note here is that the final end of the Caliphate occurred in 2 stages. And Rashid Rida began writing this book in between those 2 stages. The first stage occurred in November of 1922 when the Turks abolished the Sultanate. So let's just look at those words a little bit. Now, the Ottomans were both sultans and caliphs, but in their situation, the word sultan was actually more important than the word caliph. But caliph was included among their titles, right? But generally, the word sultan, by the period we're speaking about, captures the temporal aspect of authority, whereas the word caliph captures the spiritual aspect of authority. So you've got a sultan-caliph, a sultanate-caliphate. And in November of 1922, the Turks abolished the sultanate, but left in place a caliphate, right? So the temporal aspect, which was by that point purely nominal and purely theoretical in any case, was abolished, leaving in place a purely spiritual figurehead, right? And then in March of 1924, that was abolished entirely, and that was by and large the end of the Caliphate. There have obviously been various some attempts to revive, but none that have really been enduring or significant. Don't have time to get into that right now. So at the time that we're writing, Rashid Rida is still, as you heard me read there, is still identifying himself as a supporter of the Turkish government. And one of the reasons for that is because of its military successes in its efforts to achieve independence. It had uniquely or nearly uniquely, as a Muslim power, compelled the great powers to reckon with it as a peer, right? Well, not necessarily as an equal, but to take it seriously. And for that reason, Rashid Rida saw the Turks as, quote unquote, Islam's sharp sword, right, as their preeminent material power, which in his book here, he's looking to combine with the Arabs' spiritual preeminence, right, to bring these 2 things together. Now, the book is curious in the sense that it outlines a proposal to revive the Caliphate that Rida did not expect to see realized. While disavowing resignation, he did not envisage the Turkish leadership, who he has yet to turn against, he before too long will, taking up the task he sets down. I guess that, again, that task is reviving the Caliphate. The book is, it depends on the edition, 140, 150, 156 pages of dense Arabic. And across all of that space, there's very, very few occasions where he expresses any optimism about the Caliphate actually being revived. Whereas on multiple occasions, he states quite matter-of-factly that he doesn't expect that to happen. The resolve that that would require is simply lacking. So what motivated him to write if he's setting down a proposal that he didn't actually expect to see realized? Well, we can start by his own explanation there that I just read, that he, as a committed Muslim, took seriously the burden God places upon the learned class to quote-unquote explain matters clearly, and this duty applies all the more in circumstances where leading figures are misrepresenting something important about Islam, as he saw the Turks doing when Mustafa Kemal and others justified their reduction of the Sultanate Caliphate purely to a caliphate, to its purely spiritual aspect. Furthermore, as I also mentioned, he was a businessman, right? His livelihood depended on selling magazines, in which he often commented on current events. So it would not be surprising, therefore, when you have this dramatic event happening, that he would want to write and comment upon it. In doing that, he inverts the widely held notion, widely held at the time, that the Caliphate was an anachronism, that it was a relic, that it was something that properly fit previous eras of history, but not the modern era of history. At the same time, as I said, he's always looking to be both modern and Islamic, so he also takes pains to emphasize its canonical basis. Islam requires it. He draws on, to that end, on classical authorities, Taftazani, Marwadi, in a commentary that is often apologetic and idealized. The Caliphate is the singular means by which religion and life in this world are sustained. The right to rule rests on popular will. Authority inheres in the community, not the person of the ruler. The Caliph is successor to the messenger, not a deputy of God. Following a conventional line, Rida notes that the Caliph should be elected by the people. Again, the word should is to be underlined. The people who in the discourse are known as those who loose and bind, a very vaguely defined amorphous group of people, but essentially those who, by virtue of their status, their learning, their reputation, their good standing in the community, are empowered to represent the community, to act on its behalf, to make agreements such as the agreement on who should be the Caliph, and then to elect him and to pledge allegiance to him. At the same time, he notes that the jurists allowed for hereditary caliphates, which he calls a caliphate of tyranny. Now, the word tyranny here is that's a multivalent term, both in Arabic, taghallub, and in English, tyranny. In this context, it doesn't have to do with how a person behaves once they are in office. What it captures is that the idea that a person is in place as ruler not because they are elected or chosen or because it reflects the popular will, but rather because they have inherited that office in the manner of a monarch. They've been designated to that role by a previous monarch, by a previous caliph. This is allowed, the scholars, Islam, Muslim belief allows this essentially on the basis that chaos is worse than oppression. Chaos is worse than oppression. Years and years of oppression are preferable to one day of chaos. The idea being that if you depose a caliph, somebody who's inherited the office, what is likely to be the alternative is not a better caliph, but rather multiple claimants and chaos and anarchy. And that mechanism enabled the scholars to see hereditary dynastic caliphates and caliphs as Islamically valid, even though they were short of ideal. Now in this, I think we can say that the phrase "not fully" might capture Rida's position. In other words, dynastic caliphates, the Caliphate of the Umayyads, the Caliphate of the Abbasids, the Caliphate of the Ottomans, are legitimate but not fully legitimate. And if that is so, his concern in this book is much more on the not fully part of that than the legitimate part of that. His concern is to show how that's a deviation from the ideals. And we had a reference to that in that quote I just read when he refers to the Muslims' practice with regard to the caliphate. The Muslims' practice with regard to the caliphate, the way that they allowed it to deviate from the path that God had set down for it, the way that they had allowed it to deviate from its ideal. So Rida wants to stress that properly constituted, the caliph is no autocrat, right? His authority is limited in various ways. He has to adhere to the prescription of God's book, to the prescriptions of the prophet's statements, and he's also constrained by the requirement that he has to consult with the community in order to manage the people's affairs and uphold the righteousness of the religion. So here this hinges on the rule of necessity. The gap between this ideal and what actually existed is addressed through this idea of the rule of necessity, where just as whereas there is a prohibition on eating pork, where it's necessary, it is allowed to do that. And so recognition of a tyrannical caliphate is similar in that respect, right? But here we've got like a general idea and a specific. The general idea is that Muslims have been lax by deferring always, and I think deferring there is a key word, deferring to this situation without following their duty, which is to investigate whether in fact there is in fact a viable alternative. So always deferring, never investigating. And he upholds that rhetorical stance very firmly without, however, identifying any specific case and saying, well, look, here's a case where the rule of necessity should not apply, or here's a case where it should not have applied. So that's his rhetorical stance, holding that very firmly, but it would have to be said, not including specifics. All right, just a couple of minutes left. He then goes on in the remainder of his book to outline proposals for revival. He uses here the idea of a caliphate of necessity as kind of a midpoint between a caliphate of tyranny and an ideal caliphate, right? Caliphate of tyranny, the person becomes the ruler because they've inherited that role, or they are in that place through force, or on the basis of partisan support of a group or a clan or something like that. An ideal caliphate is one where the caliph has all of the requirements set down by the law and is elected by the people who loose and bind, that is, the people who represent the community, and who then pledge allegiance to him. And if the caliph is indeed constituted in that way, then failing to pledge is an egregious sin. He posits this idea of an in-between stage of a caliphate of necessity, where a caliph has some, but not necessarily all, of the required credentials to hold office, suggesting that an institution could be then created where caliphs or candidates for the caliphate and for other offices could be properly trained in the law. They could be trained to become mujtahids. Raise your hand if you know the word mujtahid. Okay, so qualified to undertake ijtihad, right? That means qualified to reason independently, right? As distinct from simply imitating what your teachers and others have given you, like what you all do in your classes, right? You don't just regurgitate what your professors give you. You think independently about it, right? And he posits that as a mechanism by which an ideal caliphate could then be constituted. Some people, when they've looked at this, have said that, well, is he thinking of something like an Islamic papacy, quote unquote, or an Islamic patriarchate? On that point, it would be worth mentioning, I think, that he specifically mentions those institutions, and when he does so to contrast Islam with Christianity and to indicate how they have different mechanisms of authority and how such an institution would not be suited to Islam. How exactly then it would play out in a real world situation remains somewhat of a hypothetical. We simply don't know that. 16 months after, 16 months after he began writing this, the Turks completely abolished the Caliphate in March of 1924, so 16 months later. In the literature, it's generally referenced as 2 years later, but in fact it was a pretty short space of time. And whereas in the passage that I just read from December 1922, he speaks about being a supporter of the new Turkish government, led by Mustafa Kemal, who will be come to be known as Ataturk, father of the Turks. He then turns completely against them, describing Ataturk and the Kemalists generally as more egregious enemies of religion than Lenin in Russia. And this leads him then to go in other directions, and by this point he had, if he had a clear-eyed reading of how likely it was that the Caliphate could in fact be revived, as indeed he probably had all along. And I think I've just about exhausted my allotment of time, so I will thank you for your patience. I wasn't sure how we'd go for time, but I've got a handout here with a few of the key vocabulary items since you're learning Arabic that you can practice reading out. So you guys can take a look at this. Just leave that with you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'd like to thank everyone who attended today. It was great having you all. Please be sure to follow the UNL Arabic Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channels. Also, if you would like to stay behind and take pictures with Dr. Simon Wood or any of our guests, then you're welcome to do that. Also, if your sticker was a star, you are also welcome to come up here and get your gift. Thank you.